Hello, my name's Sean Moran and I'm going to talk to you about academic reading. Academic reading is a very personal sort of activity, and all I can really do is to explain to you the kind of approaches I take towards academic reading in the hope that some of those ideas might be of use to you too. The first thing I would do when reading a piece of academic text is to have a quick skim through and make sure that it's worth spending some time reading this text in detail. So I look at the title, I look at the authors, I try and assess their credibility. If there's an abstract or a summary, I'll read that first just to get an idea of what the main points of the paper are. I'll have a quick look through the rest of the paper, look at any side headings, any subheadings, anything in bold type, any diagrams, look at the conclusion perhaps, have a quick look at the bibliography and see what sort of sources the author was using. I'm trying to get an overall impression of the paper, not to read it in detail, but just a quick overview of the terrain before I start exploring it, if I can use that metaphor. Okay, having done this, I now need to attack the paper in a little bit more detail. Perhaps the word attack is a bit too strong, but I do want to emphasize that this is an active process. This is not the same as reading a newspaper or a novel. It's a different sort of activity. We're trying to engage with the thoughts of the author. We're trying to engage with the ideas in an active way. Now, I find in order to do this, I need to have a pen or a pencil in my hand. It's not enough just to be reading the text. So I read through the article, the paper, or the book chapter, and when I come across anything interesting in any way, I'll underline it and maybe add a little comment in the margin. So, for example, maybe I'll underline something that I strongly agree with. This really resonates with my thinking. Okay, so I underline it and I put a tick next to it. Or there's some statement that the author makes that really isn't supported, or it's an outrageous statement. I mean, this does happen sometimes. Then I'll underline it and put an exclamation mark. Similarly, I'll put a question mark for something I don't understand. It may be that there's a new word that I haven't seen before. And this is one of the joys of academic reading. It will expand your vocabulary. If every time you see an unfamiliar word, you put a circle around it, a question mark, and look it up, either there and then in a dictionary, or if you haven't a dictionary to hand, you do it later, or maybe use the internet. In any case, it would be worth finding out what this word means, because once you've done that, it's your word. It belongs to you. You've added it to your vocabulary. So I carry on reading through the paper, looking in more detail at some sections. Others are fairly familiar. I can read them fairly quickly. And there's no shame in going back and reading a sentence over again. It might be that the first time you read it, you can't really extract the meaning from it. So read it again. Read it 2-3 times if necessary. I carry on reading, annotating, and then I reach the conclusions. If it's a good piece of work, the conclusion should really tell the whole story. They should recap the main points of the argument and reach a final stop, reach a final point. So the conclusion, like the bit at the beginning, the abstract, both of those are worth reading particularly carefully. Having read that, I then take another look at the bibliography and try and assess the kind of texts that the author has based his or her writing on. A good, strong bibliography gives me confidence in the paper. So, I've now reached the end of the paper. It's covered in all sorts of annotations. And don't be afraid of doing this. I mean, if you're like me, when you were little, it was definitely a no-no to write in a book. But it's okay now. We're grown-ups. These are academic texts. It's the done thing now to annotate them. I mean, of course, not if it's a library book, but if it's my own book, I will write all over it. That's okay, that's allowed. I still can't bring myself to do it in fountain pen if it's a book, but I will underline it in pencil with the thought that I can erase it again later. I mean, I never do, but potentially I could. So, get over that hurdle. It's okay to write in academic texts. Okay, I then put the text away and something then amazing happens. The ideas that I've been engaging with when reading this paper, they're sort of working away. They take on a life of their own. So while I'm doing something else, these ideas are bubbling there in my subconscious. Occasionally they'll pop through. I might be watching the television and something will just trigger off a point that appeared originally in the academic paper. You'll find this will happen. Or when you're driving, some of the ideas might just return into your conscious thinking. Having done this, we can then return to the paper after a few days and just remind ourselves of our annotations. Look at the bits you underlined. Try and get back into the frame of mind you were in when you first read it. Try and bring to the front of your mind the main points of the author's arguments or points or evidence. Now, the thing you do next depends on your purposes. If this is for exam purposes, it will be important to thoroughly learn the main points of the paper, in which case one technique is to put the paper down, get a sheet of blank paper, and try to write down the 5 or 6 key points in that paper. You can then look back at the paper and see, do your points match the points as they appeared in the paper? If not, you can modify them, try again. And this way you'll get a real solid grip on the key points. If, on the other hand, you've read this paper because you need it for an essay of your own, you need to respond to it in some way, we look at it then with a slightly different point of view. We're looking now for significant quotations that we can pull out and incorporate into our own essays. With proper crediting, of course. It's very important in academic writing that we name our sources. So if the paper's by Smith, 1997, you would put after your quotation, brackets, Smith, 1997. Then it's crystal clear that this is not your writing, but this came from some other source. In the bibliography then to our essay, we would give a fuller reference, giving all the full details, the name, the date, the publication, the town it was published, and the publisher. These are standard techniques, Harvard referencing techniques. Okay, another thing we might want to do is to look for parts of the argument that we disagreed with or we thought it was on shaky ground. In those cases, we need to be able to incorporate that into our essay in a critical way. As I mentioned earlier, we're not taking the author's ideas for granted. He has to, or she has to, defend those ideas against our attack. So it's okay for us to probe more deeply into the thinking and find fault with it. This is critical thinking, critical writing, and it's very much encouraged. So there we are. I hope that some of my points have been of use to you. I thoroughly enjoy academic reading. I don't see it as a chore. Once you get accustomed to doing it, it becomes a real luxury. It almost feels decadent to be spending a couple of hours reading an academic paper. Now, you might not think so right now, but once you get used to it, I can assure you, you will enjoy it. So there we are. Enjoy your academic reading. I hope you find it beneficial, and I hope you found some of my tips work for you. Bye-bye.